The wind howled like a wounded animal across the frozen ridges of the Wyoming-Montana borderlands, carrying with it the promise of death. Clara Whitmore pulled her wool coat tighter against her chest, squinting through the swirling snow that had descended upon the mountain pass with unexpected fury. The mare beneath her stumbled, its breath coming in ragged clouds of steam that disappeared instantly into the white void. "Easy, Duchess," Clara murmured, though her own voice trembled, not from the cold that bit through her leather gloves, but from the growing certainty that she had made a terrible mistake. 3 days. Samuel had been gone 3 days on what should have been a simple deer hunt. Her little brother, barely 15 and eager to prove himself a man, had ridden out with his rifle and enough provisions for a day, maybe 2 at most. Their father, Captain Whitmore, though he insisted folks still call him Captain despite the war being 8 years past, had waved off her concerns with typical military brevity. "Boy needs to learn the land," he'd said, not looking up from his ledgers. The ranch consumed him these days. Thousands of acres of prime grazing land that made him one of the most powerful men in the territory. Can't coddle him forever, Clara. But Clara knew these mountains. She'd grown up riding them, learning their moods and treacheries from the Shoshone woman who'd helped raise her after her mother died. She knew how quickly autumn could turn vicious here, how the weather could shift from crisp sunshine to killing cold in the span of an afternoon. And she knew Samuel, brave, foolish Samuel, would push too far, climb too high, always chasing one more track, one more ridge. The storm had rolled in fast from the north, catching even the old-timers by surprise. By the time Clara had saddled Duchess and ridden out despite her father's stern disapproval, the temperature had plummeted 20 degrees. Now, 6 hours into her search, she could barely see 10 feet ahead. Duchess stumbled again, and this time Clara heard the mare's sharp whinny of pain. Dismounting carefully on the narrow trail, she ran her hands down the horse's right foreleg and felt the heat and swelling just above the hoof. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." The mare had thrown a shoe and torn something in the soft tissue. In good weather, it would mean a slow walk home. In this storm, with the night falling and the temperature dropping fast, it meant death for them both. Clara looked around desperately, trying to orient herself. The familiar landmarks had vanished behind the white curtain of the blizzard. She thought she was on the old Bridger Trail, maybe 2 miles from Coulter's Peak, but the storm had turned the world into a featureless wasteland. Her hands were already going numb inside her gloves, and ice crystals were forming on her eyelashes. "Think," she commanded herself, fighting down the panic that clawed at her throat. Her father had trained her better than this. Shelter, find shelter. She remembered something, a story from the trappers who sometimes stayed at their ranch. There was an old hunting cabin somewhere near here, built by some long-dead mountain man. She'd never seen it herself, but the men had described it being just off the trail, marked by a lightning-struck pine, leading Duchess carefully, each step a small agony for the injured mare. Clara pushed forward into the storm. The wind seemed to have fingers, finding every gap in her clothing, stealing what little warmth remained. Her split riding skirt, so practical for ranch work, offered little protection against the driving snow. Ice formed on the hem, weighing it down with each step. Time lost meaning in the white fury of the storm. It could have been minutes or hours before Clara spotted the blackened skeleton of a pine tree, its twisted trunk standing like a monument to some ancient catastrophe. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by fresh fear. The tree was there, but where was the cabin? The trappers had said 50 paces east, but in this storm, she could walk past it at arm's length and never know. Then she saw it, a dark smudge against the white, almost invisible until she was nearly upon it. The cabin was smaller than she'd imagined, built of rough-hewn logs chinked with mud and moss, with a roof of split shingles now thick with snow. A small chimney poked through one end, and miracle of miracles, she could smell smoke. Someone was already there. Clara hesitated, her hand moving instinctively to the skinning knife at her belt. These mountains attracted all manner of men, trappers, prospectors, outlaws fleeing justice, A woman alone, even one armed and capable, was vulnerable. But Duchess gave a low groan of pain, and Clara felt the choice slip away. They would die out here without shelter. She tied the mare under the small lean-to attached to the cabin's side, noting the presence of another horse, a rangy bay gelding that looked like it had seen hard use. Then, squaring her shoulders, she knocked on the plank door. No answer. She knocked again, harder this time. "Hello, please, I need help. My horse is injured and we're caught in the storm." Still nothing, but she could hear movement inside, the scrape of a chair on wood flooring. Someone was definitely in there. Choosing not to answer, the cold was seeping into her bones now, making her teeth chatter. Pride be damned. Clara pushed open the door and stepped inside. The cabin's interior was dim, lit only by a small fire in the stone hearth, and what little gray light filtered through the single window. It took her eyes a moment to adjust, to make out the figure sitting in the shadows at the rough table against the far wall. He was perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair that needed cutting and a beard that had seen better days. His clothes were worn but serviceable: canvas pants, a thick wool shirt, and a leather coat that bore stains she didn't want to identify. But it was his eyes that held her attention, gray as the storm outside, cold and wary and utterly without welcome. A revolver lay on the table within easy reach of his right hand. "I said nothing about coming in," he said, his voice low and rough. Carrying the faint musical accent of the deep south, Clara lifted her chin, meeting his stare despite the fear crawling up her spine. "And I said my horse is injured and we're dying out there. I'm not looking for trouble, mister. Just shelter until the storm passes." He studied her for a long moment, taking in her snow-covered coat, her chattering teeth, the way her hand rested on her knife hilt. "That your horse making noise out there? She's hurt, threw a shoe and tore something. Storm will kill her anyway. Not if I can help it." Something flickered in those cold eyes. Surprise, maybe, or a grudging respect. He gestured to the fireplace with his left hand. "Warm yourself, then, but keep your hands where I can see them." Clara moved to the fire, extending her frozen fingers toward the flames. The warmth was painful at first, needles of sensation returning to her numbed extremities. She was acutely aware of the man watching her, of the revolver still within his reach. "What's your name?" she asked, not turning around. "Does it matter? I like to know who I'm sharing a roof with." "Elias Crow. And you?" Clara hesitated. Her father's name was well known in the territory, not always kindly. "Annie." She lied. "Annie Baker." "Well, Miss Annie Baker, that's quite a storm to be riding in alone." "My brother," she started, then stopped. No need to tell this stranger more than necessary. "I was looking for someone. In this weather, they're likely dead already." The casual cruelty of the statement made her flinch. Maybe not. She heard him stand, the chair scraping again. Her body tensed, but he only moved to add wood to the fire. This close, she could smell him, leather and gunpowder and something else, something dark and metallic. Blood, she realized. Old blood. "You running from something, Mr. Crow?" she asked, surprising herself with the boldness of the question. His laugh was short and bitter. "Aren't we all?" They stood in silence for a moment, the fire crackling between them. Outside, the storm raged on, shaking the small cabin with its fury. Clara knew she should be afraid, alone with this dangerous stranger, miles from help, with no one knowing where she was. But strangely, she felt only a bone-deep weariness. "I need to tend to my horse," she said finally, "in this storm. She's all I have to get home." Elias studied her again, then reached for a lantern hanging on a peg. "I'll help. Can't have you freezing to death on my doorstep. Too much trouble." Together they ventured back into the storm. Elias examined Duchess with surprising gentleness, his hands sure and knowing as they traced the injury. "It's bad," he said, having to shout over the wind. "But not hopeless. Get her inside." "Inside? Unless you want her to freeze. Cabin's big enough." It was a struggle. but between them they managed to coax the injured mare into the cabin. Duchess's eyes rolled white with fear at first, but the warmth soon calmed her. Clara found herself fighting tears of relief. "Thank you," she said simply. Elias shrugged, already turning away. "Don't thank me yet. Storm could last days. Hope you like your company scarce and your conversation short." Clara looked around the small cabin. One room, perhaps 15 feet square, with the fireplace, table, 2 chairs, and a narrow bunk against one wall. Days in this space with this taciturn stranger. She touched her knife again, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed. "I'll take the floor," she said. "You'll freeze." "Then I'll stay by the fire." "Suit yourself." He returned to his chair, to his revolver, to his shadows. "But Miss Baker, you pull that knife on me, and storm or no storm, you'll find yourself back outside. Clear, crystal clear. Mr. Crow." The wind screamed against the walls like something trying to claw its way in. Clara sank down beside her horse, stroking Duchess's neck, whispering soothing words. She was alive. They were both alive. For now, that had to be enough. In the corner, Elias Crow watched her with those gray eyes, and Clara had the unsettling feeling that she had walked into a different kind of storm entirely, one that had nothing to do with wind and snow, and everything to do with the dangerous man whose shelter she now shared. The storm raged for 3 days. Clara learned to measure time by the rhythm of necessary tasks: melting snow for water, tending the fire, checking Duchess's injured leg, avoiding Elias Crow's penetrating gaze. The cabin, which had seemed merely small at first, shrank with each passing hour until she felt she could hardly breathe without disturbing the delicate balance they'd established. That first night had been the worst. She'd kept her word and made a pallet on the floor near the hearth, using her saddle blanket and coat, but the wooden planks sucked the warmth from her body, and by midnight she was shivering so violently she could hear her teeth chattering. Elias had said nothing from his bunk, but she'd felt him watching in the darkness. "There's an old buffalo robe in the chest," he'd said finally, his voice carrying a note of exasperation. "Unless you prefer freezing to death out of pure stubbornness." Pride warred with survival. Survival won. The robe smelled of age and campfire smoke, but it was warm, and Clara had wrapped herself in it gratefully. She'd whispered a thank you into the darkness, but if Elias heard, he gave no sign. By the second day, they'd developed an unspoken routine. Elias would rise before dawn, stoking the fire and checking the storm through the single window. Clara would tend to Duchess, examining the swollen leg, applying snow to keep the swelling down, whispering reassurances to the frightened animal. They would eat in silence, hardtack and jerky from Elias's supplies, since Clara had lost her saddlebag somewhere on the trail. "You know horses," Elias observed on the morning of the second day, watching her work. "I was raised with them," Clara replied carefully. It was the most he'd spoken since that first night. Ranch girl? Something like that. He didn't press, and she was grateful. The less he knew about her true identity, the safer they both were. Her father had enemies, men who wouldn't hesitate to use his daughter against him, and Elias Crow, with his southern accent and the way his hand never strayed far from his gun, was exactly the sort of man her father had spent the war years hunting. But as the hours crawled by, the silence became its own kind of torture. Clara found herself stealing glances at him, trying to read the story written in the lines of his face, the scars on his hands. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke of hard living, of years spent watching his back. When he slept, which wasn't often, he did so lightly, starting awake at the slightest sound. "You were in the war," she said on the afternoon of the second day. It wasn't a question. His gray eyes flicked to her, then away. Everyone was in the war, one way or another. Which side? Does it matter now? I suppose not. But they both knew it did. The war might be 8 years past, but its ghosts haunted every corner of the frontier. Men still killed each other over uniforms they no longer wore, causes that no longer existed except in memory and hatred. That night, the temperature dropped so low that ice formed on the inside of the window. Clara woke to find her breath misting in the air. The fire burned down to embers. She struggled to her feet, teeth chattering, reaching for wood to rebuild the fire. "Leave it," Elias said from the darkness. "Come here." "What?" "You're half frozen. That buffalo robe isn't enough in this cold. We share warmth or we both freeze. Your choice." Clara stood frozen, not from cold but from indecision. Every instinct screamed danger. But her fingers were numb, her feet like blocks of ice, and she could hear Duchess's labored breathing in the corner. If she died, who would care for her horse? Who would find Samuel? Slowly, carefully, she moved to the narrow bunk. Elias shifted to make room, his back to the wall. Clara lay down beside him, rigid as a board, the knife still strapped to her belt between them. He pulled the worn blankets over them both, and she could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the leather and wood smoke scent of him. "I won't hurt you," he said quietly. "I know," Clara replied, though she didn't, not really. But the warmth was seeping into her bones, and exhaustion was stronger than fear. She woke hours later to gray dawn light and the strange sensation of safety. Sometime in the night, she'd turned toward him, seeking warmth, and now her head rested against his shoulder. His arm curved protectively around her. For a moment, still caught between sleep and waking, she let herself rest there, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. Then reality crashed back. She jerked away, nearly falling off the narrow bunk in her haste. Elias was already awake, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "Storm's breaking," he said, as if nothing had happened. The third day brought a different kind of tension. The storm still howled, but with less fury now. They could venture out briefly to gather more wood, to check on Elias's bay gelding in the lean-to. The forced intimacy of sharing the bunk each night, purely for survival, they told themselves, had broken down some invisible barrier between them. "You never said what you were running from," Clara ventured as they sat by the fire that evening, sharing the last of the coffee. "You never said who you're really looking for," he countered. "My brother, he's just 15, went hunting and didn't come back." Something softened in Elias's hard features. "I had a brother once, younger than yours, 14 when he joined up, lying about his age." His voice went distant. "Fool kid thought war was some grand adventure. Died at Antietam, shot by some Union officer who probably went home to his own family that night." Clara's blood ran cold. Antietam. Her father had been at Antietam, had won a commendation for valor there. How many boys had fallen under his command? How many brothers lost? "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Sorry doesn't bring them back." He stared into the fire. "Nothing brings them back. But sometimes you get a chance to balance the scales a little." The way he said it made her shiver. "Is that why you're here, balancing scales?" His smile was sharp as a blade. "Maybe. Or maybe I just like the solitude." That night, when they shared the bunk again, Clara was acutely aware of every point of contact between them. The night before had been about survival. This felt like something else, something dangerous in an entirely different way. She could feel the tension in his body, matching her own. "Annie," he said into the darkness. "That's not your real name, is it?" She didn't answer for a long moment. "Does it matter?" "No," he said finally. "I reckon we're all entitled to our secrets." But as she lay there, feeling the warmth of him against her back, Clara wondered if secrets could survive in such close quarters. The storm was weakening. Soon it would end, and they would part ways, she to search for Samuel, he to whatever dark purpose had brought him to these mountains. She should be relieved at the thought. So why did her heart constrict at the idea of leaving this cabin, of never seeing Elias Crow again? In the corner, Duchess snorted softly in her sleep. The fire crackled and settled, and outside, the wind continued its lonely howl, but softer now, like a lament for something not yet lost but soon to be. "Tell me about your brother," Elias said suddenly. "The one you're looking for." So she did, describing Samuel's laugh, his recklessness, his desperate need to prove himself in a world that seemed to demand hardness from even its youngest sons. As she spoke, she felt Elias relax beside her, the constant vigilance easing just a fraction. "He sounds like a good kid," he said when she finished. He's just lost right now, trying to be something he's not. Aren't we all?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Clara turned to face him in the darkness, though she could barely make out his features. "What are you trying to be?" "Elias Crow." "A ghost," he said simply. "Someone who passed through without leaving a trace." "Too late for that," she said without thinking. His hand found her face in the darkness, fingers ghosting along her cheek. "Is it?" Her breath caught. The touch was gentle, almost reverent, completely at odds with the dangerous man she'd first encountered. She should pull away, should remember who she was, who he probably was. Instead, she leaned into his touch. "Just for a moment. The storm's ending," she whispered. "I know. We'll have to leave soon. I know." But neither of them moved, suspended in that moment between what was and what could never be. While outside, the dying storm sang its mournful song and the mountains kept their ancient silence. The fever struck Clara on the fourth night, swift and merciless as a mountain cat. She'd spent the day helping Elias clear snow from around the cabin, both of them eager to escape the confines that had grown too small, too charged with unspoken tension. Her boots had leaked, something she'd hidden from him out of stubborn pride, and by evening, she was shivering uncontrollably despite the fire's warmth. "You're burning up," Elias said, pressing his hand to her forehead after she'd collapsed onto her pallet by the hearth. The concern in his voice surprised them both. "I'm fine," Clara insisted, though her teeth chattered violently. "Just tired. Like hell you are." He was already moving, filling a pot with snow to melt for water. "Get those wet clothes off." "I said I'm—" "Annie." His voice cut through her protest, firm but not unkind. "Those wet clothes will kill you faster than any bullet. Now stop being stubborn and let me help you." Her fingers were too numb to work the buttons, after watching her struggle. Elias knelt beside her, his hands surprisingly gentle as he helped her out of the soaked outer garments, leaving her in her chemise and wool undergarments. Any other time, the impropriety would have mortified her. Now she could only shiver as he wrapped her in the buffalo robe and his own blankets. The hours that followed blurred together in a haze of fever dreams and bitter cold. Clara drifted between consciousness and delirium, aware only of Elias's constant presence, the cool cloth on her burning forehead, the strong arms that held her when the chills became violent shaking, the low voice that spoke to her through the darkness. "My sister died of fever," she heard him say at some point, though she couldn't tell if it was real or dream. "Sarah, she was 12. Nothing I could do but watch her slip away." Clara tried to respond, to offer comfort, but the words tangled on her tongue. In her fever-addled state, she kept seeing Samuel's face superimposed over Elias's, kept hearing her father's voice calling her name, not Annie, her real name. "Clara," she mumbled, not aware she was speaking aloud. "My name is Clara." She felt him stiffen beside her. "Clara what?" But she was already sliding back into the fever's embrace, mumbling about home, about the ranch, about her father, the captain, who still wore his uniform to Sunday dinner. When consciousness returned, pale sunlight was streaming through the window. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside crystalline and still. Clara found herself in the narrow bunk, pressed against Elias's chest, his arms wrapped around her as if he'd been holding her together through sheer will. "How long?" she whispered, her throat raw. 2 days, his voice rumbled through his chest. "Thought I was going to lose you a few times there." She became aware of several things at once, that she was wearing only her undergarments beneath the blankets, that Elias's shirt was damp with sweat from her fever, that his hand was stroking her hair with absent tenderness. She should pull away. She didn't. "You stayed with me," she said unnecessarily. Where else would I go? The question held more weight than its simple words suggested. She tilted her head to look at him, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. The harsh lines of his face had softened with exhaustion and worry. There was a gentleness in his gray eyes she hadn't noticed before, hidden beneath layers of wariness and old pain. "Why?" she asked. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "You reminded me of someone I couldn't save." His hand stilled in her hair. "Maybe I just needed to prove I could do better this time." Clara reached up, touching the scar that ran along his jaw. "How did you get this?" "Shenandoah Valley." 64. His voice was carefully neutral. "Union cavalry saber." Her hand trembled. "The Shenandoah Valley campaign." Her father had been there too, leading cavalry charges that had broken the Confederate lines. How many scars had he left on men like Elias? How many men had he sent home broken, if they made it home at all? "The war's over," she whispered. "Is it?" He caught her hand, holding it against his scarred cheek. "Sometimes I think we're all still fighting it, just in different ways." The intimacy of the moment, lying in his arms, her hand on his face, the weight of shared warmth and whispered confessions, suddenly overwhelmed her. Clara tried to sit up, but the world tilted alarmingly. "Easy," Elias said, steadying her. "You're still weak. I need to find Samuel," she said, though the thought of leaving this strange sanctuary made her chest tight. "He's been gone too long. Your horse can't travel yet, neither can you. But, Annie, Clara," her real name on his lips sent a shiver through her. "Your brother. If he survived the storm, he found shelter. If he didn't finish, but his meaning was clear." She wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at her again. Elias eased her back down, adjusting the blankets around her. This time, when he started to pull away, she caught his hand. "Stay," she said simply. He did. Over the next days, as Clara's strength returned, something fundamental shifted between them. The careful distance they'd maintained was gone, eroded by those fever-hazed nights when pretense had been stripped away. They still didn't speak of it directly. The growing connection, the way their hands would brush and linger, the charged silence when their eyes met across the small space. Instead, they talked of other things. Elias told her about growing up in Georgia, about the small farm his family had worked before the war took everything. She told him about learning to ride before she could properly walk, about the Shoshone woman who'd taught her to read the mountain's moods. "You never asked," Clara said one evening as they sat by the fire, sharing a meal of rabbit Elias had snared. "About my father. But you know, don't you? Who he is." Elias was quiet for a moment, staring into the flames. "Captain, Colonel now. I'd guess Josiah Whitmore. They called him the Gray Wolf during the war. Never lost a cavalry engagement." Clara's heart sank. "You knew all along. Suspected when you mentioned Antietam. Knew for sure when you were feverish, talking about the ranch, your father's uniform." He looked at her then, his expression unreadable. "You want to know if I've come here to kill him?" The question hung between them like a blade. Clara found she was holding her breath. "Have you?" "I thought about it. For years, I thought about it." He turned back to the fire. "My brother died under his command. A lot of boys did. But then I met his daughter, half frozen and too stubborn to die, risking everything to save her own brother." A bitter smile touched his lips. "Funny how the world works sometimes. I'm not my father," Clara said quietly. "No," Elias agreed. "You're not?" That night, when they lay together in the narrow bunk, Clara was acutely aware that their time was running short. The storm had been gone for days. Duchess was healing. Soon there would be no excuse to stay, no reason to maintain this impossible bubble they'd created. "What happens when we leave here?" she asked the darkness. Elias's arm tightened around her. "I don't know. My father, if he knew. He won't hear it from me." She turned in his arms to face him, though she could barely see him in the dim light. "Where will you go?" "West, maybe. California. Somewhere the past can't follow. Take me with you, she said, the words escaping before she could stop them. She felt him go very still. Clara, I know it's impossible. I know we're from different worlds, that we should be enemies, that my father would... She stopped, overwhelmed by the futility of it all. I know, but I had to say it. His hand found her face in the darkness, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. In another life, he said softly, I'd have courted you properly, brought you flowers, asked your father's permission, built you a house with my own hands. I don't want another life, Clara whispered. I want this one, with all its scars and complications. He kissed her then, gentle at first, then with growing urgency as weeks of tension finally found release. Clara had been kissed before, chased pecks from suitable young men at church socials, but this was different. This was fire and desperation and a sweetness that made her ache. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elias rested his forehead against hers. You're going to be the death of me, Clara Whitmore, or your salvation, she countered. He laughed, low and rueful. That too. They held each other through the night, memorizing the feel of it, the impossible rightness of two souls finding each other across a divide that should have been insurmountable. Outside, an owl called mournfully, and the mountains stood witness to a love that could not be, yet was. When dawn broke clear and cold, they both knew their time had run out, but for just a little longer, they pretended otherwise, holding tight to what they'd found in a snowbound cabin at the edge of the world. The seventh day dawned crisp and clear, the kind of brilliant mountain morning that made the previous week's blizzard seem like a fever dream. Clara stood in the doorway of the cabin, watching Elias prepare for what they both knew must come, a hunting expedition to replenish their dwindling food stores. I should come with you, she said, though her legs still felt weak from the fever. You can barely stand for more than 10 minutes, Elias replied, checking his rifle. Besides, someone needs to watch the horses. They both knew it was an excuse. The truth was simpler and more complex. They needed distance, even if just for a few hours, to think clearly about what was happening between them. The kiss they'd shared had shattered the last pretense of propriety, and neither quite knew how to navigate what came after. Be careful, Clara said, hating how her voice caught on the words. He paused in the doorway, looking back at her with those storm-gray eyes. Always am. But 3 hours later, when he stumbled back into the clearing, Clara saw immediately that something had gone wrong. His left sleeve was torn and bloodied, his face pale beneath its weathered tan. What happened? She rushed to him, supporting his weight as he sagged against the doorframe. Mountain cat, he said through gritted teeth. Guess I wasn't the only one hunting today. Clara helped him inside, her hands steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. The wound ran from shoulder to elbow, 3 parallel gashes that bled freely but, thankfully, didn't appear too deep. Sit, she commanded, already reaching for the medical supplies in his saddlebags. This is going to hurt. Already does, he muttered, but submitted to her ministrations without protest. Clara had helped tend injured ranch hands before, but her hands trembled as she cleaned the wounds with whiskey from Elias's flask. He hissed through his teeth but remained still, watching her work with an intensity that made her skin warm. You've done this before, he observed. Life on a ranch. Someone's always getting hurt. She tried for lightness, but her voice shook. The sight of his blood, the thought of how much worse it could have been, made her stomach clench. Take your shirt off. I need to see if there's more damage. He complied, and Clara's breath caught. Not at the wound, though it looked angry against his pale skin, but at the map of scars across his back and chest. Some were old, faded to silver lines. Others were newer, still pink and raised. Each one told a story of violence survived. My God, she whispered. Elias. War leaves its marks, he said simply. Her fingers traced a particularly vicious scar across his ribs. This wasn't from the war. It's too recent. He caught her hand. Leave it. Clara. But she couldn't. Each mark was evidence of the life he'd led since the war's end, the running and fighting and surviving that had brought him to this cabin. To her. Who did this to you? Men who thought I had something they wanted, men who remembered my face from the war, men who just wanted to prove they were faster with a gun. His thumb stroked across her knuckles. It doesn't matter now. It matters to me. She finished cleaning and bandaging the wound in silence, acutely aware of his skin beneath her hands, the rise and fall of his breathing, the way his muscles tensed when she hit a tender spot. When she was done, she sat back on her heels, looking up at him. You can't keep running, she said softly. Living like this, always looking over your shoulder, it'll kill you eventually. Maybe. He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Or maybe I'll find a reason to stop running. The weight of his gaze, the implication in his words, made her heart race. She rose to her knees, bringing her face level with his. Elias, I know, he said. I know all the reasons this is impossible. Your father, my past, the whole damn world standing between us. I know. But, she prompted, hearing the unspoken word, but when I'm with you, none of that seems to matter. When I watch you tend that horse of yours, or see you fighting through fever with more grit than most men I've known, or feel you next to me at night, he cupped her face in his hands. You make me want things I'd given up on wanting. Clara turned her head, pressing a kiss to his palm. What things? A home, a future, someone to protect instead of just surviving to see another sunrise. His voice roughened. You. She kissed him then, careful of his injured arm, pouring all her frustration and longing and impossible hope into the connection. He responded with equal fervor, pulling her closer with his good arm until she was practically in his lap. This is madness, she gasped when they broke apart. Complete madness, he agreed, then kissed her again. They were interrupted by Duchess whinnying nervously in the corner. Both turned to see the mare favoring her injured leg, ears pinned back in distress. Something's wrong, Clara said, immediately moving to examine the horse. The leg was hot to the touch, more swollen than it had been that morning. Infection, damn it! She spent the rest of the day tending to Duchess, making poultices from what meager supplies they had, trying to bring down the swelling. Elias helped as much as his injury allowed, and she was touched by his gentleness with the frightened animal. You're good with her, Clara said as he held Duchess's head, keeping her calm while Clara worked. Had a horse once, before the war. His voice was distant, lost in memory. Beautiful bay mare named Jezebel, raised her from a foal. Had to shoot her at Chancellorsville when she took grape shot to the chest. Clara's hands stilled. Another casualty of war. Another loss in a lifetime full of them. I'm sorry. Long time ago. But she could see the old grief in his eyes. That night, as they lay together in the narrow bunk, Clara could feel the change between them. The kiss had opened a door they couldn't close, and now every touch, every glance, carried weight. She was acutely aware of his bandaged arm, the way he held himself carefully to avoid aggravating the wound. Tell me about California, she said into the darkness. Never been there, just heard stories. Gold in the hills, orange groves in the valleys, the ocean stretching on forever. He was quiet for a moment. Place where a man could start over, maybe build something instead of tearing it down. It sounds wonderful. Come with me. The words hung in the air between them, more real than when she'd suggested it before. This time, he was the one asking. My father would hunt us down, Clara said, though her heart was already racing at the possibility. He'd never stop looking. Then we'd go farther, Mexico, maybe, or up to Canada, somewhere beyond his reach. And live how? Always running, always afraid. Rather be running with you than standing still alone. Clara turned in his arms, trying to see his face in the darkness. You mean it. Never meant anything more in my life. His hand found hers, interlacing their fingers. I know I'm not what you deserve. I've got blood on my hands and prices on my head, but I swear to you, Clara, I'd spend whatever time we had making you happy. building you that house I talked about, giving you a life worth living." "I don't need a house," Clara whispered. "I just need you." He made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "You say that now, but when the reality sets in, when you're washing clothes in some Mexican river instead of managing your father's ranch—" She silenced him with a kiss. "I've made my choice. The question is whether you'll let me." "Let you?" He pulled back slightly. "Clara, I'd follow you into hell itself if you asked. Then it's settled. When we leave here—" A sound from outside made them both freeze. The distinctive crunch of footsteps on snow. Multiple sets. Elias was out of bed instantly, reaching for his gun despite his injured arm. "Duchess," Clara whispered. Someone must have seen the smoke from their fire, or maybe tracked Elias here. Either way, their sanctuary was about to be breached. Elias pressed the revolver into her hands. "Stay back. If things go bad, we face it together." She interrupted, rising to stand beside him. "No matter what." He looked at her for a long moment. This woman who'd stumbled into his life a week ago and somehow become everything. Then he nodded, turning to face whatever was coming. The footsteps grew closer, and Clara gripped the gun tighter, her heart hammering against her ribs. Their week of isolation, of impossible dreams and stolen moments, was over. Reality was about to come crashing through that door, and she didn't know if their fragile new love could survive it. But as Elias reached for the door handle, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever came next, she wouldn't let him face it alone. The door burst open before Elias could reach it, and 3 men stumbled inside, bringing a whirlwind of snow and cold air. Clara's finger tensed on the trigger before she recognized the lead figure, Tom Bradley, her father's foreman. Ice crusting his beard and exhaustion etched into every line of his weathered face. "Miss Clara." Tom's eyes widened with relief. "Thank the Lord. We've been searching for days." He stopped short, taking in the scene. Clara in her undergarments and blanket, the revolver in her hands, and Elias standing protectively beside her, shirtless and bandaged. The 2 men with Tom, ranch hands she recognized as Pike and Morrison, had their hands on their guns, eyeing Elias with deep suspicion. "Tom," Clara said, lowering the weapon with forced calm. "How did you find me?" "Your horse's tracks, miss. Lost him in the storm, but picked him up again yesterday. Your father's near out of his mind with worry. And Samuel," Tom's voice caught. "He made it home 2 days ago. Said he got turned around in the storm, holed up in a cave, when he heard you'd gone looking for him." Relief flooded through Clara so intense her knees nearly buckled. Samuel was safe, but even as joy filled her heart, she felt something else drain away, the fragile world she and Elias had built in this cabin. "Who's this?" Pike asked, his hand still hovering near his holster as he stared at Elias. "Someone who saved my life." Clara said firmly, "I was caught in the storm. My horse went lame, mister. Crow here gave me shelter, tended me through fever. I owe him everything." Tom's eyes narrowed, taking in Elias's southern drawl that had colored those few words. The scars, the way he held himself like a man ready for violence. "That's so. And what's a man like him doing up here alone?" "Hunting," Elias replied evenly. "Same as anyone." "Hunting," Pike spat to the side. "With them Reb scars and that look about you, I'd say you're hunting something specific." The tension in the small cabin ratcheted up another notch. Clara stepped forward, putting herself partially between Elias and her father's men. "Mr. Crow has been nothing but honorable. I won't have you—" "Easy, miss," Tom interrupted, though his eyes never left Elias. "We're just being careful. Lot of bad men in these mountains. Man's gotta wonder what kind of fellow lives alone up here, especially one who looks like he's been on the wrong side of the law more than once." "The war's over," Clara said coldly. "Or haven't you heard? Some wars don't end just 'cause the shooting stops," Morrison muttered. Clara felt Elias tense beside her and placed a warning hand on his arm. The last thing they needed was bloodshed. "Tom, I need to get Duchess ready to travel. Her leg's been injured. Infected now. She'll need careful handling." We brought extra horses. Miss, leave the mare. Come with us now. Your father. I'm not leaving, Duchess. Her voice brooked no argument. And I'm not leaving without properly thanking Mr. Crow for his kindness. You and the men can wait outside while I dress and prepare. That's not a request. Tom looked like he wanted to argue, but 40 years of working for the Whitmore family had taught him when to recognize that particular tone. 10 minutes. Miss, then we ride. The men filed out reluctantly, Pike casting one last suspicious glare at Elias. As soon as the door closed, Clara turned to Elias, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I have to go, she whispered unnecessarily. I know. His voice was steady, but she could see the muscle jumping in his jaw. Your brother's safe. That's what matters. Is it? She gripped his hands, uncaring of the dried blood on her fingers from tending his wounds. Is that all that matters? He pulled her close with his good arm, pressing his forehead to hers. You know it isn't. But what choice do we have? Those men already suspect what I am. If they knew the truth, if your father knew. Come with me, she said desperately. We'll tell them a story. You're a drifter who saved me. Nothing more. My father rewards those who help his family. He could give you work, a new start. Clara. Her name was a sigh on his lips. You think he wouldn't recognize me? I rode against him at Cedar Creek. My brother died under his command. Even if he's never seen my face, he'll know what I am the moment he looks at me. Men like us, we recognize our own kind. She was crying now, unable to stop the tears. So this is it, a week stolen from time, and then nothing? Not nothing. He kissed her softly, tasting salt and sorrow. Never nothing. You gave me something I thought I'd lost forever, a reason to want tomorrow to come. That's more than I had any right to hope for. Elias, listen to me. He gripped her shoulders gently. Go home. Be with your family. Find some nice rancher's son who'll give you babies and a good life. Forget about the Reb gunman you met in a snowstorm. You know I can't do that. You have to. His voice roughened. Because if you don't, I'll come for you. I'll ride right up to your father's ranch and damn the consequences. And we both know how that ends. A sharp whistle from outside, Tom's warning that time was running short. Clara dressed hurriedly, her hands shaking as she fastened buttons and tied laces. Elias helped her with her boots, kneeling before her like a knight before his lady. There's something I need to tell you, he said quietly, not looking up. About why I'm really here. You deserve to know. I don't care. I came here to kill a man. The words fell between them like stones. A Union officer who ordered the execution of Confederate prisoners after they'd surrendered. My brother was among them. I tracked him for 3 years, and the trail led here. Clara's blood ran cold. Who? Marcus Wheeler. Commands the garrison at Fort Laramie now. He finally looked up at her. Not your father. Never your father, though I had cause enough. That's the truth of it. She cupped his face in her hands. And now? Now. He turned his head to kiss her palm. Now I'm thinking there might be better ways to honor the dead than adding to their number. Now I'm thinking about California and orange groves and starting over. His smile was bittersweet. You ruined me for revenge. Clara Whitmore. Hope you're satisfied. Another whistle, more insistent. Clara stood, and Elias rose with her. She picked up her father's old cavalry coat, the one she'd been wearing when she arrived, and hesitated. Then, decision made. She pulled out the tarnished insignia pin she kept in the inside pocket, the one that had belonged to her mother. Take this. She pressed it into Elias's hand. So you don't forget. As if I could, but he closed his fist around the pin. They went to 10 Duchess together one last time. Elias showed Tom how to wrap the infected leg, what poultices to use. The foreman watched with grudging respect as Elias handled the mare with practiced skill. You know horses, Tom observed. Had a few in my time. Miss Clara says you saved her life. She saved mine right back. Elias met the older man's eyes steadily. You take care of her. Something passed between the two men, an understanding that transcended old loyalties. Tom nodded slowly. Always have. Always will. As Clara mounted one of the spare horses, she looked back at the cabin that had been their whole world for 7 impossible days. Elias stood in the doorway, memorizing her face as she was memorizing his. "Thank you," she called out, the inadequate words carrying all the weight of what couldn't be said in front of others. "For everything." He touched his hat, a gesture that might have been casual to observers but felt like a benediction to her. "Safe travels, Miss Whitmore." She wanted to say more, wanted to scream that this was wrong, that love shouldn't bow to old hatreds, that she'd rather face her father's fury than leave him behind. Instead, she turned her horse and followed Tom's lead, each hoofbeat carrying her farther from the man who'd shown her what it meant to choose love over duty. They were a mile down the trail when she heard it, the low, mournful whistle of a night bird that didn't belong to these mountains. It was a rebel signal call, one she'd heard the prisoners make sometimes when her father brought them to the ranch for work detail. She reined in her horse, heart pounding. "What is it, miss?" Tom asked. "Nothing." She lied, but her eyes scanned the ridgeline where the sound had come from. For just a moment, she thought she saw him, a lone figure on horseback, watching their party from above. Then Pike said something about making good time, and when she looked back, the ridge was empty. But the message was clear. He was following, making sure she made it home safe, protecting her still, even from a distance. Clara straightened in her saddle and rode on, the memory of that week burning bright as the winter sun on snow. Behind her, somewhere in the vast wilderness of the mountains, Elias Crow kept pace with her party, a guardian angel with blood on his hands and love in his heart. The storm had passed, but what it had left in its wake would forever change the landscape of 2 lives that should never have intersected. And as Clara rode toward home and duty, and all the weight of family expectation, she carried with her the knowledge that somewhere under the same cold sky, a man who'd forgotten how to hope was learning to believe in tomorrow again. The cavalry pin pressed against Elias's chest where he'd tucked it inside his shirt, still warm from her hand. California could wait. First, he had to see her safely home. After that, perhaps the orange groves would still be there, waiting for a man ready to plant something instead of destroying it. He touched his heels to his horse's flanks and melted back into the trees, a ghost following his heart through the frozen wilderness, unwilling to let go just yet of the miracle that had stumbled into his life in the midst of a killing storm. The Whitmore Ranch sprawled across the valley like a small kingdom, its prosperity evident in the well-maintained fences, the numerous outbuildings, and the cattle dotting the distant pastures. Clara had been home for a week, but the place felt foreign to her now, as if she were viewing it through different eyes that had seen another way of living, another possibility. "You've been quiet," Samuel said, finding her in the stable where she was tending to Duchess. The mare was recovering slowly, and Clara spent hours each day with her, finding solace in the familiar routine. Her younger brother looked older somehow, his boyish features marked by his own ordeal in the mountains. The cockiness that had sent him out hunting alone had been tempered by his brush with death. "Have I?" Clara asked, not meeting his eyes. "Father's noticed too. He thinks you're still shaken from being lost in the storm." Samuel paused, studying her with uncomfortable perception. "But that's not it, is it?" Clara's hand stilled on Duchess's flank. "What do you mean?" "Tom told me about the man who helped you, Crow." Samuel's voice dropped. "He also told me how he found you, half-dressed, that man wounded, the 2 of you alone for a week." Heat flooded Clara's cheeks. "Nothing improper happened, Mr. Crow was a perfect gentleman." "I'm not questioning your honor. Clara." Samuel moved closer, his voice earnest. "But I know you. Something changed out there. You came back different." Clara finally looked at her brother, seeing unexpected understanding in his eyes. "You came back different too. That's not the same, isn't it?" She turned back to Duchess. brushing the mare's coat with perhaps more vigor than necessary. We both went into those mountains as children playing at being grown. We both learned what it really means to face death, to make choices that matter. The only difference is that your lesson is acceptable to discuss at dinner." Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he laughed, a rueful sound. "When did you become so wise?" Somewhere between the fever and watching a good man wrestle with demons he didn't choose. The words came out before she could stop them. "Clara." Samuel touched her shoulder. "Be careful. Father's already sent men to Fort Laramie, asking about any Confederate deserters or outlaws in the area. If this crow is what Tom suspects, he saved my life." Clara's voice was fierce. "Whatever else he is or was, he saved my life. I know, and I'm grateful. But gratitude and whatever else you're feeling, they won't protect him if Father decides he's a threat." Clara said nothing, but her hands trembled as she continued grooming Duchess. Samuel squeezed her shoulder once more and left her alone with her thoughts. That evening at dinner, her father dominated the conversation as usual, discussing ranch business and territorial politics with the single-minded focus that had built their fortune. Colonel Josiah Whitmore was still an imposing figure at 55, his iron-gray hair and beard meticulously groomed, his bearing military straight despite the years of civilian life. "The Hendricks spread is up for sale," he announced, cutting his beef with precision. "Good grazing land along Willow Creek. I'm thinking of making an offer." "More land, Father?" Clara asked. "Don't we have enough?" Her father's sharp gaze fixed on her. "There's no such thing as enough when it comes to securing our future. You'll understand when you're managing your own household." He paused meaningfully. "Which reminds me, young William Harper has been asking about you. Good family, solid prospects. His father owns the largest mercantile in Cheyenne." Clara's stomach churned. "I'm not interested in William Harper." "You haven't given him a chance. He's calling again on Sunday. I expect you to receive him properly this time." "Father." "The matter's settled. Clara." His tone brooked no argument. "You're 22 years old. It's time you started thinking about your future instead of riding around the countryside like a wild Indian." Clara bit back her response, knowing it would only lead to another lecture about duty and family obligations. But as she pushed food around her plate, she thought of Elias's hands gentle on her face, his voice rough with emotion as he spoke of California and orange groves and new beginnings. That night, she stood at her bedroom window, looking out at the mountains that loomed dark against the star-filled sky. Somewhere out there, was he looking at the same stars? Had he given up and ridden west? Or was he still near, unwilling to completely let go? A movement in the yard below caught her eye. One of the ranch dogs had stirred, tail wagging at something beyond the circle of lamplight. Clara's heart leaped, but then Tom emerged from the shadows, making his nightly rounds. And the moment passed. 3 more days crawled by. William Harper came to call, all pomaded hair and practiced charm, talking endlessly about his plans to expand his father's business empire. Clara smiled and nodded and served tea, all while feeling like she was suffocating in her own parlor. "You seem distracted, Miss Whitmore," William observed during a lull in his monologue about import tariffs. "Do I? Forgive me. I've been worried about my horse. She was injured recently." "Ah, yes. I heard about your misadventure in the storm." His pale eyes studied her with surprising shrewdness. "It must have been quite an ordeal, being stranded like that." "Mr. Crow was very kind." Clara said carefully. "Crow. Yes, I've heard that name recently." William leaned forward. "There's talk in town about a man by that name. Some say he's a gunfighter from Texas. Others claim he rode with Quantrill's raiders during the war." Clara's teacup rattled against its saucer as she set it down. "People say many things. Few of them are true." "Perhaps. But a woman of your standing must be careful about associations. Reputation is such a fragile thing." His smile was sympathetic, but something cold lurked beneath it. "I would hate to see yours tarnished by unfortunate rumors." "Is that a threat?" Mr. Harper? Merely a friend's concern. He stood, smoothing his vest. I hope you'll consider my suit seriously. Clara, I could offer you a good life, far from any unpleasantness. After he left, Clara fled to the stables, needing the comfort of Duchess's presence. But as she entered, she found she wasn't alone. A figure stepped from the shadows, and her heart stopped. Hello, Clara. Elias stood before her, thinner than she remembered, his clothes dusty from hard travel. But his eyes were the same, gray as storm clouds, warm as summer rain when they looked at her. You shouldn't be here, she whispered, even as every fiber of her being sang at his presence. My father has men watching. I know. Took some doing to get past them. He stayed where he was, drinking in the sight of her. I tried to leave, made it 50 miles west before I turned back. Turns out I'm not as strong as I thought. Elias. She took a step toward him, then forced herself to stop. They know about you. There's been talk in town, questions at Fort Laramie. If they catch you here, I'm leaving tonight, for good this time, but I had to see you once more, to ask you again. He pulled something from his pocket, her mother's cavalry pin, polished now until it gleamed. Come with me, Clara. Tonight, we'll ride hard, be in Colorado by week's end. From there, anywhere you want to go. The offer hung between them, shimmering with possibility. Clara could see it all, the life they could build together, free from the past's shadows. But she could also see her father's rage, the men he'd send after them, the blood that would inevitably be spilled. I want to, she said, her voice breaking. God help me, I want to more than anything. But I can't be the reason you die, and that's what will happen if I go with you now. My father will never stop hunting us. He'll make it a matter of honor, a family pride. You know this? Elias's jaw tightened. I'm not afraid of your father. I know. That's what terrifies me. She moved closer, unable to help herself. Give me time. Let me find another way. There has to be. The sound of approaching hoofbeats cut her off. Multiple riders, coming fast. Elias's hand went to his gun, but Clara caught his wrist. The loft, she whispered urgently. Quickly. He hesitated only a moment before vaulting up the ladder into the hayloft. Clara grabbed a pitchfork, trying to look busy as Tom entered with 2 other hands. Miss Clara. Tom's eyes swept the stable, missing nothing. Heard voices. Everything all right? Fine. Tom, just talking to Duchess. You know how she gets nervous at night. The foreman's weathered face was carefully neutral. Your father wants to see you. Says it's urgent. Clara's heart sank, but she kept her expression calm. I'll be right there. Tom lingered a moment longer, and she had the strangest feeling he was giving her a warning. Then he ushered the other men out, leaving her alone again. They know, Elias said quietly from above. This was a mistake. No. Clara looked up at him, memorizing his face in the lantern light. The only mistake would be letting you think I don't love you, because I do, Elias Crow, with all my heart. Clara, go, now, before they come back. She pressed her hand to her heart. But know this, I'll find a way. Somehow, I'll find a way to be free. And when I do, I'll be waiting. He finished. Always. He dropped from the loft, landing cat-quiet beside her. For one precious moment, he pulled her close, kissing her with all the desperate longing of their separation. Then he was gone, melting into the darkness like the ghost he'd become. Clara stood alone in the stable, her lips still warm from his kiss, her heart torn between duty and desire. From the main house, she could hear her father's voice raised in anger. The reckoning was coming, but as she walked toward her fate, Clara carried with her the knowledge that somewhere in the vast darkness, a man who'd forgotten how to hope was waiting for her to find her freedom, and she would find it. No matter the cost, the game had changed. It was no longer about stolen moments in a snowbound cabin. It was about choosing the life she wanted over the life others had planned for her. And Clara Whitmore, who'd survived a blizzard and found love in the most unlikely place, was finally ready to fight for her choice. The trial was a spectacle that drew half the territory to the small courthouse in Cheyenne. Word had spread like wildfire. Elias Crow, the Confederate gunman who'd sheltered Colonel Whitmore's daughter during the blizzard, had been captured trying to ambush a supply wagon headed for Fort Laramie. At least, that was the official story. Clara sat in the front row, her back straight despite the weight of dozens of eyes upon her. Whispers followed her everywhere these days. Fallen woman, rebel sympathizer, shame of the Whitmore name. She ignored them all, her gaze fixed on the man in chains at the defendant's table. Elias looked thinner, his face bearing new bruises from his capture, but his eyes, when they found hers across the crowded room, held the same unwavering love that gave her strength to endure. The territory of Wyoming versus Elias Crow. Judge Harrison intoned, his voice carrying over the crowd's murmur. The defendant stands accused of attempted robbery, possession of stolen goods, and conspiracy against the peace. Clara knew the truth. Elias hadn't been trying to rob anyone. He'd been trying to leave the territory when a patrol recognized him from the wanted posters her father had quietly circulated. The stolen goods were supplies he'd purchased fair and square, though no merchant would testify to that now. District Attorney Morrison, a thin man with ambitious eyes, rose to make his opening statement. Gentlemen of the jury, we will show that the defendant is a dangerous criminal who has terrorized our community. A former Confederate raider who— I was never a raider, Elias interrupted, his voice calm but firm. I served honorably in the Army of Northern Virginia, 3rd Georgia Infantry. Judge Harrison banged his gavel. The defendant will remain silent unless addressed. Your Honor. A clear voice rang out from the gallery. I ask permission to address the court. All heads turned as Clara rose from her seat. Her father, sitting rigid beside her, grabbed her arm. Sit down, he hissed. You've shamed us enough. Clara shook him off and stepped forward. Your Honor, I have testimony relevant to this case. The prosecutor's eyes gleamed with malicious satisfaction. Your Honor, Miss Whitmore's involvement with the defendant is well known. Her testimony would be highly prejudicial. I'll hear what she has to say. Judge Harrison decided, curiosity overcoming propriety. Miss Whitmore, you may approach. Clara walked to the witness stand, aware of every eye upon her. She'd worn her best dress, the severe black making her look older, more formidable. This was her battlefield, and she would not yield. State your name for the record. Clara Marie Whitmore. And what is your relationship to the defendant? Clara lifted her chin. Elias Crow saved my life during the blizzard 3 weeks ago. He gave me shelter, tended me through fever, and acted with complete honor despite having every reason to hate my family. A ripple of surprise went through the crowd. The prosecutor scrambled to his feet. Objection! The witness is— I'm not finished, Clara said firmly. I also testify that Elias Crow is the man I intend to marry, should this court see fit to show mercy. The courtroom erupted. Her father shot to his feet, his face purple with rage. You will not. I forbid it. Judge Harrison hammered his gavel repeatedly. Order. Colonel Whitmore, you will control yourself or be removed. Through the chaos, Clara kept her eyes on Elias. He was staring at her with a mixture of love and horror, shaking his head slightly. She knew what he was thinking, that she was destroying herself for him. But she was done hiding, done pretending. When order was restored, the prosecutor approached her with a predatory smile. Miss Whitmore, are you aware of the defendant's past? His activities during and after the war? I'm aware he fought for the Confederacy, as did thousands of others who are now considered respectable citizens. Are you aware he came to this territory specifically to kill a Union officer? Clara's heart skipped, but she kept her voice steady. I'm aware he came here carrying old pain and seeking what he thought was justice. I'm also aware he chose mercy over revenge, chose love over hate. How many men can say the same? Pretty words, Miss Whitmore. But the fact remains. A new voice interrupted from the gallery. "That this man saved my grandson's life last winter, and I'll not stand by and watch him railroaded." An elderly Shoshone woman stood in the back of the courtroom, her dignity commanding attention despite her worn clothes. Clara recognized her, Mary Crow Feather, who lived on the reservation outside town. "2 winters passed," the woman continued. "My grandson fell through river ice. This man," she pointed at Elias, "pulled him out, built a fire, stayed with us until the boy was safe. Asked nothing in return." "You do, Your Honor," the prosecutor protested. "This witness wasn't scheduled." "These aren't formal proceedings yet. Counselor, I'll hear her." Judge Harrison leaned forward. "Ma'am, you're certain this is the same man?" "I remember faces," Mary Crow Feather said simply. "Especially faces of those who show kindness when they don't have to." Others began to stand. A homesteader whose barn Elias had helped raise, a widow whose horses he'd recovered from thieves. Each testimony painted a picture at odds with the dangerous criminal the prosecution sought to portray. But it was Clara's father who provided the most surprising testimony. "Your Honor," Colonel Whitmore said, rising slowly, "I request permission to speak." Clara held her breath as her father approached the bench. He looked older than his years, the weight of command and loss etched in every line of his face. "I've spent considerable time these past weeks investigating Mr. Crow," he began. "I discovered he had good reason to hate me. His younger brother died under my command at Antietam. The boy was 14, lied about his age to enlist. In the confusion of battle." He paused, his voice roughening. "Such things happened too often in that war. Too many boys on both sides who never came home." The courtroom was silent now, hanging on every word. "I also discovered," the colonel continued, "that Elias Crow had opportunity to take his revenge. My daughter was alone with him for a week, completely at his mercy. He could have used her against me. Instead, he protected her, cared for her, sent her home safe." He turned to look at Elias directly. "I cannot forgive the past, neither what I did nor what was done to me, but I can recognize an honorable man when I see one." Clara's eyes filled with tears. She had never loved her father more than in that moment. "Furthermore," Colonel Whitmore said, turning back to the judge, "I wish to drop any charges I may have made against Mr. Crow, and—" He took a deep breath. "If my daughter chooses to marry him, I will not stand in her way. The war has taken enough from all of us. Perhaps it's time to let the dead rest and the living find what peace they can." The silence that followed was profound. Even the prosecutor seemed at a loss for words. Judge Harrison cleared his throat. "Mr. Crow, do you have anything to say in your defense?" Elias stood slowly, his chains clanking. "Your Honor, I came to this territory with darkness in my heart. I thought revenge would ease the pain of loss, but I found something I never expected. People who judged me by my actions, not my past. A woman who saw past the uniform I once wore to the man I could become." He looked at Clara. "I'm guilty of many things, but the only crime I'll confess to in this court is loving above my station and hoping for a future I probably don't deserve." "Mr. Crow," Judge Harrison said after a long pause, "this court finds insufficient evidence to proceed with the charges against you. Moreover, given the testimony presented here today, I'm inclined to believe you've paid whatever debts you may have owed to society." He banged his gavel. "Case dismissed. Marshal, remove those chains." The courtroom erupted again, but Clara heard none of it. She was already moving, pushing through the crowd to reach Elias as the marshal unlocked his shackles. The moment he was free, she threw herself into his arms. Not caring who saw or what they thought, "You magnificent fool," he murmured against her hair. "You just destroyed your reputation for me." "No," she said, pulling back to look at him. "I just chose love over fear. There's a difference." Her father approached them, his expression unreadable. For a moment, the three of them stood frozen, the weight of history heavy between them. Then Colonel Whitmore extended his hand to Elias. "I cannot forget that you fought against me. Mr. Crow, but I can respect that you fought with honor, and I can be grateful that when my daughter needed help, you were the man who gave it." Elias shook the offered hand, his grip firm. "I cannot forget my brother, sir, but I can promise you this. Your daughter will never want for anything I can provide, and any children we have will grow up knowing only love, not hate." The colonel nodded once, sharply, then turned to Clara. "You've chosen a difficult path, daughter." "I've chosen my own path, father, for the first time in my life." "Then I suppose," he said with a slight smile, "we'd best start planning a wedding." As they left the courthouse together, Clara, Elias, and her family, the crowd parted before them. Some faces showed disapproval, others curiosity. But Clara saw something else too: hope. If a Confederate soldier and a Union colonel's daughter could find love after such bitter division, perhaps there was hope for a nation still struggling to heal. "So," Elias said quietly as they stepped into the afternoon sun. "California? Anywhere," Clara replied, threading her arm through his. "As long as we're together." Her father overheard and sighed. "If you must go west, at least consider Colorado. I have business contacts there who could use a man with your skills, Mr. Crow, and it's close enough that I might occasionally see any grandchildren." Elias and Clara exchanged glances, a whole conversation in a look. Colorado wasn't California, but it was a start. A new beginning for two souls who'd found each other in the midst of a storm and chosen love over the easier path of hate. "We'll consider it, sir," Elias said. As they walked through the streets of Cheyenne, Clara noticed the Shoshone woman, Mary Crow Feather, watching from across the square. The elderly woman caught her eye and nodded once, a benediction from one who understood that sometimes the greatest courage was in choosing to build rather than destroy. The war was over. Their war was over. And in its place, something new could finally grow. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, turning the streets of Silver Creek into rivers of mud. Clara stood at the window of their small cabin on the outskirts of town, watching the water cascade off the roof in sheets. 6 months had passed since the trial. 6 months since she and Elias had exchanged vows in a simple ceremony that scandalized half of Cheyenne and inspired the other half. "Storm's getting worse," Elias said from behind her, his arms encircling her waist. "Reminds me of another storm." She leaned back against him, smiling at the memory. "That storm changed everything." "That it did." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Any regrets?" "Only one," she said, turning in his arms. "I wish we'd had more time in that cabin, just the two of us, before the world came crashing in." Elias was about to respond when a desperate pounding at their door interrupted. They exchanged glances. Unexpected visitors rarely brought good news, especially in weather like this. Elias opened the door to reveal a soaked figure in a military raincoat. As the man raised his head, Clara gasped. It was Lieutenant Marcus Wheeler from Fort Laramie, the very man Elias had once come to kill. Wheeler's face was haggard, his uniform muddy and torn. "Please," he said, his voice hoarse. "I know I have no right to ask, but my daughter, she's sick, burning with fever. The bridge is out, no way to get her to the doctor in town. I heard you lived out here, that your wife knows healing. Please." Clara saw Elias's jaw tighten, his hand instinctively moving toward where his gun usually rested. The moment stretched taut as wire. "Elias," Clara said softly, placing a hand on his arm. "There's a child who needs help." He looked down at her, and she saw the war raging in his gray eyes. Old hatred against new promises. The past against the future they were building. Then his shoulders relaxed, and he stepped aside. "Bring her in," he said quietly. Wheeler returned moments later, carrying a small form wrapped in blankets. The girl couldn't have been more than 7. Her face flushed with fever, blonde hair plastered to her forehead. She looked nothing like the Confederate boy who died at Antietam, and everything like him, young, vulnerable, caught in circumstances beyond her control. Clara immediately took charge, her months of nursing experience during the war finally serving a purpose that didn't involve death. She directed the men to place the child on their bed, then began mixing herbs and preparing cool compresses. "What's her name?" Clara asked as she worked. "Emma," Wheeler replied, hovering anxiously. "My wife died last year. She's all I have." Clara caught Elias's expression at those words. The echo of his own loss was too clear to miss, but he said nothing, simply helped by fetching water and stoking the fire as Clara directed. Through the long night, they worked together to break the child's fever. Wheeler sat in the corner, his exhaustion evident, while Elias maintained a careful distance, speaking only when necessary. But Clara noticed how his eyes kept returning to the sick child, how his hands were gentle when helping to change the cooling cloths. Near dawn, Emma's fever finally broke. She opened clear blue eyes and looked around in confusion. "Papa?" Wheeler was at her side instantly, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I'm here, sweetheart. You're going to be fine." The child's gaze found Elias standing in the shadows. "Are you the angel Papa prays to?" Despite everything, Elias's mouth quirked in a slight smile. "No, little one. Just a man who knew another brave soldier once. He would have been about your age now, if things had been different." Wheeler's head snapped up, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You're him, the one who was asking about me last year, the Confederate whose brother—" He trailed off, his face going pale. "I am," Elias confirmed simply. The two men stared at each other across the small room, years of war and loss hanging between them. Clara held her breath, ready to intervene if necessary. "You could have turned us away," Wheeler said finally. "God knows you had cause." "I could have." Elias agreed. "Once, I would have. But my wife taught me that children shouldn't pay for their father's wars." He glanced at Clara, his expression softening. "She has a gift for saving men from themselves." Wheeler stood slowly, his movements careful as if approaching a wild animal. "I remember Antietam. I remember too many boys who shouldn't have been there, wearing blue and gray alike. Your brother," his voice cracked. "I'm sorry. It's not enough, can never be enough, but I'm sorry." "He was 14, Elias said quietly. "Lied about his age to enlist. Thought it would be a grand adventure. They all did," Wheeler whispered. "Every last one of them." Emma stirred on the bed, reaching for her father. The tension in the room shifted, softened by the presence of innocence that knew nothing of old hatreds. "She'll need rest," Clara said, breaking the charged silence. "And proper food when she's ready. You're both welcome to stay until the weather clears." Wheeler looked between her and Elias, clearly torn. "I couldn't impose." "You're not imposing," Elias said. The words seemingly surprised even him. "War's over. Wheeler, maybe it's time we started acting like it." The next 2 days passed in a strange domesticity. Wheeler helped with chores while Emma recovered, and slowly, carefully, two former enemies began to see each other as simply men. They discovered shared experiences, the mud of Virginia, the cold of winter campaigns, the letters that never came. They didn't speak of Antietam directly, but it hovered between them, acknowledged in silences and careful words. On the second evening, as Emma played with a corn-husk doll Clara had made for her, Wheeler finally broached the subject that had haunted them all. "I've carried their faces with me," he said quietly, staring into the fire. "Every boy who fell under my command. Your brother, I remember him now. Brave to the end, charged when older men ran." He looked up at Elias. "It doesn't change what happened, but you should know, he died a soldier's death, quick and clean. I made sure of that." Elias's hands clenched and unclenched several times before he spoke. "Thank you for that. It helps to know." Clara reached over and took her husband's hand, feeling the tremor in it. This was the closure he'd never thought to find, the answer to questions that had tormented him for years. When the rain finally stopped and the roads became passable, Wheeler prepared to leave. Emma, fully recovered, chattered happily about her new friends. blissfully unaware of the profound shift that had occurred in her father's world. "I owe you a debt I can never repay," Wheeler said, shaking Elias's hand at the door. "No debts," Elias replied firmly. "We've all paid enough. Just be a good father to that little girl. That's payment enough." Wheeler nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Then, surprising everyone, including himself, he saluted, not the sharp military gesture of before, but something more personal, more meaningful. Elias returned it slowly. And in that moment, something that had been broken since 1862 finally began to heal. After they left, Clara and Elias stood together in their doorway, watching the wagon disappear down the muddy road. "You did a brave thing," Clara said softly. "You did it first," Elias replied, pulling her close. "That day in the courthouse, you showed me it was possible to choose love over hate. I'm just following your lead." "Where does that lead take us?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment, then smiled, the first truly free smile she'd seen from him, unshackled by the past. "Wherever we want, Clara, for the first time in my life. I think we can go wherever we want." As they went back inside their small but warm home, Clara thought about circles, how life seemed to move in them, bringing people together in unexpected ways. A snowstorm had brought her and Elias together. Now another storm had brought healing where there had only been hate. She thought of their future, the children they might have, the life they would build. Those children would grow up in a world where their father could save the daughter of his former enemy, where their mother's courage in choosing love could inspire others to do the same. The cabin that had been their refuge was far away now, probably home to other travelers seeking shelter. But what they'd found there, the ability to see past old wounds to new possibilities, that traveled with them wherever they went. "I love you, Elias Crow," she said suddenly, needing to say it. "And I love you, Clara Crow," he replied. "More than all the orange groves in California," she laughed, the sound bright as mountain water. "We never did make it to California." "No," he agreed. "But I think we found something better. We found home." Outside, the sun broke through the lingering clouds, painting the wet world in shades of gold and promise. Somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark began to sing, its voice carrying across the vast Colorado sky like a benediction on all those brave enough to choose love over hate, forgiveness over revenge, and hope over the bitter lessons of the past. The storm had passed, all of them, the ones that brought destruction and the ones that brought unexpected salvation. And in their wake, new life could finally begin to grow. Thank you so much for listening to this tale from the Wild West, where love bloomed in the harshest winter and forgiveness found a way through the deepest wounds. I'd love to know where you're listening from, whether you're cozied up by a fireplace, driving through your own mountains, or perhaps even somewhere it's snowing right now. Please subscribe to Wild West Campfire and share your thoughts about Clara and Elias's journey. Did their story touch your heart as it did mine? Let me know in the comments below, partners. And until next time, keep riding toward your own horizons.